seemed to work quite well last time. Okay, so welcome everyone. This is a sort of an adaptation of something that we do, that we've done once or twice a year in the Southwark Unity Commission, where we gather people together and reflect on a particular topic, and we've done our best to adapt to that online. And I'm very happy to welcome Father Chris Pearson from the borough, our parish in the borough, Precious Blood, because when we were thinking about what topic to have, so I'm just pausing because we've got, there we are. Yes, I'm not quite sure. The pinning the speaker wasn't quite working. So when we were thinking about what topic to choose for this event, the thought occurred to us that it's roughly 10 years since the Ordinariate was established in this country, the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, for members of the Church of England who are seeking full communion with the Roman Catholic Church. And also because of that, connection between our two churches, and because of that, it's obviously there's an ecumenical interest in that, in reflecting on their experience of that, and perhaps its implications as well. So I've invited Father Christopher, whose parish is in the care of the Ordinariate, and also because it seemed a good idea, because most Catholics, I suppose, or many Catholics would have heard of the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, but I suppose not many would really know very much about it. And it seems to me, but in particular, that it's a real opportunity for us to learn from their experience in a sort of spirit of receptive ecumenism, where we, to invite them to invite Father Chris on their behalf to share some of the insights coming from that Anglican background, and having made that journey now, and been ministering as a Catholic priest now for many years within the Ordinariate. The other thing that personally I feel is that the Ordinariate has a real potential as a model for advancing Christian unity, and I'm going to invite Father Chris to reflect on that as we go along. It's not necessarily going to be a model for all forms of Christian unity, but I think there is something useful that we can learn from them. So I suppose it was about something like 10 years ago that the parish of the borough, which is near London Bridge, was entrusted to the care of the Ordinariate, and Father Chris has been the parish priest from that time. One of the things that strikes me as the bishop responsible for that part of the diocese is that the Ordinariate group that Father Chris brought with him and the original parishioners are roughly evenly matched in terms of numbers. And my experience is that they've got on extremely well over the years, celebrating Mass in the Roman Rite, and also in the Ordinariate. I may get this wrong, the Ordinariate form. Father Chris will correct me in a moment, the exact phrase. But at the same time, very much united as a single parish community. And so based on that, I thought that Father Chris would be the obvious person to share his experience with us. So, Chris, we thought we would do this evening in the form of an interview, really with myself just asking a few questions, really just to get things going. So, Father Chris, the Ordinariate's a fairly recent development, but it does come out of a tradition of Anglicanism which goes back many years. So, in other words, this isn't just something that has recently emerged. I'd like to invite you maybe to give a little background to what you might say, the Anglican background from which you yourself and many of your people are coming. I'll just pin you. There we are. So you should be highlighted now. Welcome, Chris. Thanks very much for coming.
Oh, no, thanks very much, Paul. And thank you for the invitation to come and be able to talk about the Ordinariate. I hope if I get too technical on stuff, as you said earlier, don't be afraid to ask any questions or clarification later on, or equally, if I'm too too light and with all respect to grandmothers, teaching my grandmother how to suck eggs, forgive me for that as well. So if it kind of ebbs and flows, so we'll see how we go. But nevertheless, thanks for the invitation, Paul. I'm very grateful. So the recent, well, I guess the significant dates for the Ordinariate really is in November 2009, when Pope Benedict gave the Apostolic Constitution Anglicorum Cetibus, and it's that constitution which then gave rise to the Ordinariates. Because strictly so far there are 3 Ordinariates. There's one in England, one in North America, and one in Australia. And we are Our Lady of Walsingham, under the care of Our Lady of Walsingham and John Henry Newman. And we were founded or erected in January 2011. So we are just over 10 years old, in fact. But that was the erection of the Ordinariate within this in England and Wales, because we have to be coterminous with bishops' conferences. So we are, in America, it's a bit different because there are very many bishops' conferences in the States, and again in Australia. But for our purpose in England, we were erected in January 2011, but the constitution was made by Pope Benedict in 2009. So there's a kind of a gestation to get to that. And it's called Anglicorum Cetibus, which means groups of Anglicans, because it begins with the first words of the Constitution, which describes groups of Anglicans who have repeatedly petitioned Rome for ecumenical dialogue or the hope for unity. So that's why it's called Anglicorum Cetibus. Sometimes people think it's because there are different groups around the country, so therefore it's groups of Anglicans who have joined, but it's not. It's strictly those Anglicans who, in groups, petitioned Rome for the unity of the church. So that's the kind of where we got to in the present time. But I guess it goes back further than that, and the significant date for the Ordinariate will be 1833. And if you know your history, that's the Assize Sermon. And supposedly the Assize Sermon was the beginning of the Oxford Movement. And the Oxford Movement was essentially about working for unity. And it came from the University Church in Oxford, which was John Henry Newman's, where he was vicar. And he invited John Keble, then the vicar of Hursley, to come and speak to the Assize bishops. The Assize bishops were meeting, and he gave a sermon. And at that time, there was a very controversial thing happening, which was that the bishops in Ireland were being appointed by the government. And this outraged John Henry Newman and, of course, John Keble. And he preached the famous Assize Sermon, which was, we're not quite sure when the Oxford Movement actually started, but people pinned that, the July 1833, as the beginning of the Oxford Movement. And then these men got together, John Keble, John Henry Newman, and Edward Pusey. And the 3 things they were working for at that time was holiness of life, theological acumen, and disciplined worship. They were the 3 kind of tenets, if you like, of the Oxford Movement. And so it developed. So we would now consider ourselves in the Ordinariate to be the heirs of that work of the Oxford Movement, which is working towards the unity of the church. So don't be surprised that although we are the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, we have St. John Henry Newman as our patron, because he, we believe, is the one who first came up with that work, which has been fulfilled in the Ordinariate. Does that give the background?
Thanks very much, Chris. I'll leave it focused on you because my questions will be fairly short. But that's great. And so perhaps to introduce what the Ordinariate has meant in practice, I think it might be helpful if you could share something of your experience and the experience of your community in making the journey, from the Church of England to where you are now in the borough and the present arrangement.
Okay, well, when I was an Anglican and the vicar of a parish, I was a vicar of a parish for 15 years before I became Catholic. And I think the work in that parish, and indeed organisations that I was involved with, was working for the unity of the church. That was our longing, and that comes from the high priestly prayer of Jesus, may they be one. And he prayed to his Father that we may be one, so the world may believe. So I think that was very much at the heart of our work in the Church of England, and the organisations that we were working in was for the unity of the church, so that the world may believe. So the work of unity and the work of evangelisation kind of sit side by side. They're important, they work together. So in the Church of England, we are working for this unity. There are a number of organisations we involved ourselves with, as well as our kind of prayer locally and our work locally, but also nationally and internationally. There were groups like Cost of Conscience, you might have heard of. There was a political group called Forward in Faith. And these were groups which were working for a dialogue with Rome to be able to work for that unity, a visible Christian unity. And the famous work really that came out of the Forward in Faith group was a book called Consecrated Women. Now, at that time, women bishops in the Church of England were being discussed, and a book was produced, is Consecrated Women ? And this book set out really kind of a platform by which the groups within the Church of England could come together and then work towards that unity for which we were longing, the sacramental unity, the unity of the church. And this book, Consecrated Women, set out 3 criteria that would be required. One was that a grouping, however it was defined, it could be a diocese, it could be an ecclesial structure, it could be a free province, it could be just a kind of a people getting together and working. And the 3 things that this group would have to have would be the ability to select and train its own priests. The other was that they would have free ecumenical dialogue, and they'd be free to discuss with other communions and churches. And the third, they would be able to make their own decisions. And the reason for that, the first was training and ordaining their own priests, because we wanted to have a ministry which was both formed and informed. You might understand why, but that's where that is. The other was to have the ability to make its own decisions, because often decisions in any Anglican grouping, or indeed in the Church of England, where we came from, decisions are what you want them to be. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it might not be a duck. So you're never quite sure who you were talking to, or indeed what the terminology was being used. So we wanted an ability to be able to make our own decisions, so an independence really. And the third and most important was free ecumenical dialogue. And what that meant was that we would be an independent organisation, a structure, a province, whatever, which could talk to other ecclesial communions, and you would talk knowing what, well, firstly you're talking about, but also the other people would know what you were talking about. And the problem arose in the Church of England is that there was such a diversity of sacramental understanding, the importance of scripture, the importance of ministry, how to live the moral life. There was just such different diversity that whenever another organization, and in this case the Roman Catholic Church, wanted to talk to Anglicans, depending which group of Anglicans you talked to, you got a completely different answer. So the model for this Consecrated Women book was that we would be able to have conversation with other ecclesial communions, and that what we said was what we said. So that was the important consideration. But all of that was completely blown out of the water when Pope Benedict made the Apostolic Constitution, because it was almost word perfect to what was desired in this book of criteria that we were petitioning the Church of England for this free province diocese organization to have, that we could then have these three important works. So that completely derailed by the Apostolic Constitution. That book was effectively put through the shredder because of the Apostolic Constitution. So we had, in my parish situation, I discussed with my parish, we had three choices before us. Now, bearing in mind, we were working and praying for the unity of the church, so the world may believe. We had three choices, and those were that we recognized that some of the ability to have ecumenical dialogue had been put back a number of years, 10, 20, 30 years, and it was a kind of a regathering and dusting ourselves down and picking ourselves up to find what the future is going to be. The second was to work with the groups that were being developed then around Forward in Faith, and there's a new group now. I must say I've lost contact slightly with the Church of England, but I think there's a group now called the Society. I think it's called the Society. And this society has taken over the work of Forward in Faith, which was derailed by the Apostolic Constitution. And that was kind of regathering itself to have some of those models that we worked towards to having unity, which have now been derailed, but then to kind of regather, refocus, and effectively start again with that model of a Catholic identity and having unity with Rome. Or the third option was to join the Ordinariate. They were the three choices. So we kind of backstep, dust ourselves down, or join the Ordinariate. And in my situation, when I was a vicar, I was very keen to have all those options before the parishioners. I did not want them to make any ill-informed decisions or to be rash. I did not want them to follow me. I wanted them to be influenced not by my decision, but to respond to the Lord Jesus. Where was Jesus calling you in this? You had to make the decision yourself because you would be responsible for it. So I deliberately never told people what I was thinking or what my decision was. I deliberately kept it very, very quiet until the last moment. I invited speakers for all of those three options to come, and we discussed and explored what the way forward would be. And then, of course, the time came and I had to declare, because I had to give my resignation and tell the Anglican bishop that I was going to be received into full communion. So there was a deadline for that. So I then kind of told my parish. Then people had, I was the last, if you like, to declare my hand. And people who had decided they were going to join informed me so we could have a register and kind of see how we were going to go forward. And if anything, I kind of discouraged people from joining the Ordinariate, in the first instance at least, because I wanted them to be absolutely sure. I discouraged people. I didn't want people to act rashly, because if people joined and then they're not quite sure about it, and then they become Catholics and then go back to the Church of England, as indeed some have. Or if some come and they're unhappy and it's not sure, then they're kind of spiritually and emotionally disquieted, can have an effect on others. So I wanted them to be absolutely sure that if they were going to do it, they did it for their sake and for the sake of this work of ecumenism, which was we're working for with the unity of the church. And it ended up with probably about 40% joined the Ordinariate, 10% stayed and didn't care, and probably about the other remainers were just kind of floaters and didn't really bother. So in that, when we declared our hand and said we're going to join the Ordinariate, be received into the full communion, there were about maybe 50 people from my parish who joined in one go. Then, of course, I had to go and tell the bishop, the Anglican bishop. That was a tough one. But then the Anglican bishop for the Anglican Diocese of Southwark was Christopher Chesson. And I have to say, he was phenomenally gracious and very kind, and he was really, really good. And I went to see him at a very early stage because, again, it is about kind of dialogue and knowing where people are. So I went to see him and spoke to him, and I did not say what I was going to do, or indeed what any of my parishioners were going to do. I just went to see him at a very early stage to say, these are the options, this is what we're discussing. If you want to come and talk to us, or anyone to come and see you or whatever, that's absolutely open. What I did not want to happen was for people to be cross, and there are always kind of bad feelings and misunderstandings, and I was very keen to avoid all of those in those early stage. But then the time came and I had to kind of declare my hand, and I wrote to the bishop, gave my resignation, and told the parish that I was to be received into the full communion of the Catholic Church. And that was 10 years ago tomorrow.
Gosh. That's fascinating, Chris, because I'd never really, heard the sort of background that you've described there. We might come back to that later, although I'll press on for the moment, because just to keep an eye on the time. Thinking about how to unpack this idea of what the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham is, I think it might be useful to just to clarify how it's different to other bodies and organisations that look in some ways similar. One comparison that comes to mind, which isn't exact by any means, is the Eastern Catholic churches, which have their own rites, but we're in full communion with them. So maybe if you'd just like to sort of unpack that a bit, and because I know the Ordinariate that's not, there are important differences. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the difference is East and West, essentially. We are Catholics of the Latin Rite, which means we're Catholics of the exactly the same way as any Roman Catholic is. So to be technical with you, Paul, and you were picking up what books we use, it's not an Ordinariate rite. Some people call it the Ordinariate rite. It's not a rite, it's a use of the Roman rite. And this use of the Roman rite is drawn from, at least liturgically, is drawn from our Anglican heritage, our patrimony, and most especially the Book of Common Prayer and some of the other Sarum missals and liturgical practices are drawn into the Anglican Ordinariate use, not a rite. Whereas, of course, the Orthodox and the Eastern churches, they have their own rites, and they're a different structure in that way. Perhaps one of the easiest ways would be, we cross over in many ways, because we're not a religious organization like a Dominicans or a Salvatorians or whatever, but also we're not in similar ways would be like the military ordinariate. So the military ordinariate, that's a different structure, and is similar to us in the way that it works, but not quite the same. So we kind of don't fit anywhere. We are in many ways unique in our organization. So perhaps one of the best ways to understand how we operate is having another layer. So in England and Wales, there is the whole of England and Wales, which is the Bishops' Conference, and across the country, the whole country is broken up into dioceses. And these dioceses are defined by their geography. You can draw a line around them, and in those dioceses, you can draw the parishes of those dioceses. The Ordinariate, if you like, is a layer above that. So we have structures which are very similar to a diocese, but we cover the whole of the Bishops' Conference, the geographical area at least of England and Wales, but we have systems which kind of lay coterminous, but kind of laying above. So we have an ordinary who isn't a bishop, but he could be a bishop, in Monsignor Keith Newton, in the same way the church in Southwark has an ordinary, John Wilson. They have that same kind of authority as an ordinary. I can talk about why he's not a bishop at another time if you like, but it's about kind of the importance of the structures. But when the priests are join the Ordinariate, and I join the Ordinariate, and I'm incarnated into the Ordinariate. People sometimes, when I tell them I'm Precious Blood, and I love, it's a great diocese to work in, and of course you tell them you're in Precious Blood at the borough, and they say, oh, you're a Southwark priest. And you have to kind of have a bit of definition. Say, well, so my pet phrase is to say that I work in Southwark. I'm in Southwark, but not of Southwark. So I work in the Diocese of Southwark, but I'm a priest of the Ordinariate. And the difference with the Ordinariate is that lay people can join. So they are joining by membership, and you join essentially by a piece of paper is how you join the Ordinariate. But we are not, we're a membership organization by paper, by administration, but Catholics in exactly the same way, Latin Catholics in exactly the same way of any other Roman Catholic.
Thanks, Chris. And although we're saving questions for the end, perhaps just to, might be worth my mentioning to people that although the Ordinariate certainly isn't a religious order, it's got one thing in common with the religious order, in the sense that let's say you've got a Franciscan priest who comes under the authority of his own superiors, but then he's working in a particular parish, and so he comes under his own superiors as regards what you might call discipline and where he works, but then he also needs the approval of the local bishop in order to work there, and there's a sort of a duality.
Yes.
It's sort of, in other words, what I'm saying is that it's not a totally unfamiliar scenario, so to speak. So I think,
and also,
yes.
if I may say, the unique thing of Precious Blood here is that Peter Smith, when he was Archbishop, was phenomenally generous and welcoming for us, because we were homeless for a while. When I left my Anglican days and I took my group with me, we were quite literally homeless. So I had to leave my vicarage, we had to leave our church. But when we were celebrating Mass, we had to go from church to church. So although we were a group, we were going from place to place. And we first went to a parish in where we first were, and we haven't kind of had them fitted in, as it were, with a Mass schedule. And it was almost as if every Sunday I had to announce to the group when next Sunday's Mass was going to be, because we had to find a place to have Mass. And we heard that Precious Blood didn't have such a heavy Mass schedule, so we kind of befriended, and the Salvatorians, who were then caring for this parish, again, were phenomenally generous. And Archbishop Peter Smith said, well, you know, why not kind of be there as a permanent? So we were unique in that first, because we were the first. Precious Blood was the first parish to go into the pastoral care of the Ordinariate. Now, there are some priests who work in a diocesan parish and just look after the parish. They might have a group of Ordinariate people, but essentially they work in the parish. The unique thing in Precious Blood is that we have I have two hats. I'm the group pastor for the Ordinariate and the parish priest for the parish. So you have the two things. So if I was to be knocked down by a bus on my way home, hope not, Lord, is that the replacement priest here, because the way that Archbishop Peter Smith set it up, it will be in consultation with the diocese and the Ordinariate. So there's that. So we maintain that Anglican patrimony in this parish. And what we do here, that patrimony, that tradition, Anglican tradition, will be maintained now at Precious Blood. It doesn't depend on me, Christopher Pearson, being the present parish priest. It's actually rooted in this parish, whoever the priest is, which is a gift, a sheer gift of Peter Smith.
Yes, that's very encouraging, really. And you mentioned, I know we talked about this, and the phrase Anglican patrimony is often used, and it's perhaps not the best phrase, but it would be nice to, or interesting to hear about the the Anglican heritage that you bring with you. Obviously, that the most obvious part of that would be the Ordinariate use, as you describe it, and I know there's more to it than that. But perhaps just to begin with, just to say a little bit about that liturgical side of things.
Sure. Well, the part of the heritage that we have brought is liturgical. My own view, that's quite a small part of the heritage, but it's often the kind of thing that people notice, because it's the most visible, tangible thing, identifiable thing, and people can spot that. Most prominently would be around the Eucharist, how we celebrate the Eucharist. And as I said earlier, the Eucharist, as we celebrate the Eucharist, it is the Roman rite, an Anglican use of the Roman rite. So when our missal was approved, because it had to go for approval, that makes sure that it was all full of Catholic doctrine. There was nothing Lutheran or Calvinistic in there. So it had to go through the doctrine of the faith to make sure that it was Catholic. There are some tweaks have happened. I'm not that technical on liturgy, so I'm not quite sure what they are, but if you ask an expert, I'm sure they can identify them. But the point is that it's that Anglican patrimony that we have brought. We do live stream Mass from Precious Blood. And we do the ordinary use, the Mass at least, every Saturday at 10 o'clock. So if you want to have an experience of an ordinary use Mass, then 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, you can see that. And probably the most prominent thing you'll notice is the language, because we're using Elizabethan King James language, thee and thys, and with thy spirit, those kind of prayers. But also it's not just around the Mass, it's also around our prayer and office. So we have a customary, which is the morning and evening prayer, the office of the church. We have our own kind of prayers and traditions that we use. And I was fascinated, if I can say this, when Archbishop John Wilson first came to the diocese. I remember going to a meeting and he began with prayer. And I was so encouraged because he began with an Anglican prayer, Almighty God, unto whom all hearts be open, all desires known. And I thought, well, this sounds very familiar. So the first prayer the new Archbishop uses is an Anglican prayer. I thought, well, there you go, that's patrimony.
Thanks, Chris. I was wondering whether to type this into the chat, but perhaps while we're on the subject of the ordinariate use and it being a use of the Roman Rite, I was just thinking as you were talking, I suppose if you think of where the roots lie, I suppose it's, if you think of, say, for example, the Syro-Malabar Rite or something like that, this is an ancient Eastern rite. Similarly with some of the other Oriental churches, whereas the roots of the, let's say the Book of Common Prayer and the Anglican Rite, if that's the right phrase, sort of go back to the Sarum Rite and the Roman Rite, don't they? So they're all within that. They've always been within that sort of family, absolutely, in a sense.
Yes, absolutely. It's not that the at the Reformation the Catholic traditions didn't stop. Yeah. They just took a different route and they kind of went in different branches. And what the Ordinariate, taking some of that patrimony, some of that heritage, is drawing some of that Englishness back. So
perhaps moving on then to other aspects of the Anglican heritage. Perhaps you'd like to say a little bit about the some of those other aspects that you feel are particularly valuable.
I think one of what it's often, people talk about patrimony. You hear it quite often, Anglican patrimony. And I think one of the problems with that word itself is people actually don't know what that means either. So not only are having to identify what the patrimony is, you're having to identify what patrimony is. We talk about heritage, use, tradition. It's those kind of things. And it's often the things that kind of make you who you are, how you worship, how you behave, how you pastorally care for people, how you respond to situations, that's kind of brought you to where you are. And somehow you inhabit that tradition, that upbringing, that kind of, patrimony. And it's kind of bringing all of that. So in some ways, it's, I forget who said this, but it's almost as if it's those of us who aren't ordinariate are able to identify what the patrimony is, because they can spot it. We can't, because we live it, we are it. And you need someone else to spot it. Oh, that's different, because so often identifying the patrimony can be really tough for us because we just kind of live it and are it. You need someone else to identify it. But perhaps some of the things would be pastoral care, how we respond to people in those situations. A silly example, I used to work in Italy for a while, and in an Anglican church, believe it or not, in Italy. And I remember there was a lovely guy, we met up for a drink once, and he was telling me how when he told his mum, that he was a Roman Catholic in Italy. He was meeting the Anglican vicar for a drink and a cup of tea. He said, his mum said, oh, that's nice, that's nice. He said, if he was to tell his mum he was meeting the Catholic priest, his mum would say, what have you done wrong? And the attitude was that there's a different pastoral style of, whatever. It might be just because there are fewer of us, so it's easier to do, but who knows? That's one of the differences. And the other is the lay involvement. In the tradition of Anglicanism is to have a large lay involvement and people to have a say in the in the governance and decision-making of a parish and of a group. And although in the Catholic Church, every parish is supposed to have a finance council and may have a pastoral council, in the Ordinariate, it's required. Every Ordinariate parish is supposed to have a finance council and a pastoral council. And the way that we model that here is part of the Anglican, the way of our running of the parish when we're in the Church of England. We had it's called a PCC, which is a parochial church council. And although it's a structure of the English system because of government and law, but it was a system that didn't really have much impact on government and law. It was more practical stuff, you know, repairing the drains, organizing the jumble sale, organizing the rota, it was those kind of things. So we have brought that, and we do have a, we didn't want to call it pastoral council because that's Catholic. We don't call it a PCC because that's Anglican. So we have invented something, I'm afraid, and we call it the parish governing council. Mm-hmm. And on that governing council, there are lay people, and they involve themselves in pastoral, practical, financial, and perhaps the biggest, which always had a deanery meeting yesterday, and when the clergy meet for our deanery meeting, and we talk about finances and checks and administration and new packages for the diocese. And I can tell, in all honesty, I have no idea because I don't involve myself with that. I've been here for nearly 9 years and I have never signed a check. I'm a pastor, not a financier. That's not my stuff. And I would say that's Anglican patrimony. The finances are organised by the lay folk. They organise that. So that's part of our patrimony, to have lay involvement, decision-making and responsibility taking. And hopefully that also gives them a greater sense of ownership. And any priest will tell you, it always makes their heart sink when parishioners say, what's happening in your church? Oh, no, what's happening in our church? It's not mine, it's ours. So there's a sense of responsibility and ownership from that patrimonial background.
That sounds like something that we'd be quite keen to, we're sort of struggling towards really in some of our parishes, and that's good. Okay, so maybe I mentioned that my own impressions of how things work at Precious Blood in the borough, but perhaps you, Chris, might like to say a bit about how things work in the parish in terms of the relationship between the ordinariate and non-ordinariate parishioners, if that's the right expression.
Yeah, sure. I think it's somebody asked the other day, was asking about a parishioner, and they asked if they were a member of the Ordinariate. And I had to look it up because I wasn't sure. In fact, this person was, but I wasn't quite sure. And I hope that identifies that we kind of, you know, we work together, we pray together, we worship together, and we never have the attitude of ordinariate and parish. It's rather ordinariate and parish. We kind of work together. In the first days when we first came, and the parish being run by the Salvatorians, we did have a separate mass on a Sunday. So there was a parish mass, and then we had an ordinariate mass. And we were, you know, there was 40 of the parishioners gathering and maybe 40 ordinariate people gathering. And Father Richard, who was the parish priest, says, well, why are we doing this? Why don't we just kind of get together? And we did. And we were able to fuse together kind of music, styles, just a whole kind of thing just drew together from a very kind of typical Roman Catholic parish and an ordinariate group coming and bringing their own liturgical practical styles. And we have now kind of developed that to be able to maintain, is clearly Catholic, but with an Anglican flavour. Another cheeky one that I quite enjoy really is that we have lots of hotels around here. So in the summertime, well, when hotels were open, and people would come, they saw we're a Catholic and would come to Mass. And often on a Sunday, if visitors were leaving, they would kind of hesitate and they would scratch their chin and say, excuse me, Father, is this a Catholic parish or is it Anglican? and if they weren't sure, I thought we were getting the balance right. And part of that kind of is to make ourselves Catholic, clearly Catholic, but with an Anglican flavour, so that not only do Anglicans be able to come to a Catholic worship, to a Catholic church, maybe come to full communion and feel comfortable, but also Catholics can say, oh, so this is how Anglicans are, this is how. And so there's a kind of a crossover almost of styles of understanding, and we can work in hopefully to the unity of the church. Yeah. So is it kind of, is never ever, there are some prominent kind of Catholic parishioners, diocesan members, I would say, and there are some prominent ordinariate members, but for the lion's share, most people wouldn't know who is who.
Just coming back for a moment to the aspect of the sense of ownership and the sort of greater degree of shared leadership, as you might say, I suppose, if I could put it like that.
Yes.
I must say I was very struck years ago when as a parish priest, I went along to an Anglican induction, and it seemed to me that the induction service there did express very well the significant role played by particular lay people in the parish, like church wardens and people like that.
Yes.
I guess that's a liturgical reflection of the sort of thing you've been talking about.
Yes.
I see that Father Michael's asked a question which is anticipated my next question, actually, which is that I know that anyone is welcome to come to a celebration of Mass in the Ordinariate use, and I've done that myself on a number of occasions. But if someone who's not actually in the Ordinariate group wanted formally to join the Ordinariate, who would be eligible, and how would it happen? I mean, in one sense, there wouldn't be any point in, let's imagine myself as an average, lay person. In one sense, there wouldn't be any point in me joining because I could already receive communion, in Ordinariate Mass. But supposing somebody did want to.
Yeah, there's two ways of approaching that. I think first and foremost, to be absolutely clear, we are Catholics. We're not kind of ordinary Catholics, diocesan Catholics. We're just Catholics. Yes. We're just Catholics, and we can go to either Mass and receive and be fully members in every way. The most important thing is we're in communion and in communion with Peter. That's the most important thing, which makes us Catholics. But then from that, there's different kind of traditions. So we have the Anglican heritage, which is maintained in the Ordinariate, and then there's the kind of the Catholic tradition, which we know in the diocesan and an average parish. Now, if you were to want to join the Catholic Church through the Ordinariate, there are two ways of doing it. Firstly, it's by baptism. So you can join by baptism, or you can join by being formally received and being confirmed. Now, if you were baptized in Anglican, say, then you can be received and join the Ordinariate because you have come from an Anglican background. Pope Francis extended that to say that could include those who have come from traditions who are informed by Anglican backgrounds. So a Methodist, for example, if you're a Methodist, then you could join the Ordinariate because Methodism comes from Anglicanism, so therefore you can come from that heritage. And you could be received into full communion that way. I'm not sure if it was Pope Benedict or Pope Francis who did this, but then that was also the other one that they added was to say that you can join the Ordinariate if you have come to faith through the evangelization of the Ordinariate. So if you weren't a Christian and you come across an Ordinariate, you like the heritage, you were baptized in the Catholic Church. In fact, Easter Sunday, we had a guy who was brought up in the Anglican heritage, but never baptized. So he was baptized, a Catholic, but he joined the Ordinariate by baptism. And also for those who have come by through the sacraments of initiation. So at Precious Blood, we have had people who, for example, were made baptized Catholics as babies or infants, lost the faith, have come back to the faith as adults. Because they have then received confirmation, sacrament of initiation, they can join the Ordinariate because they have been evangelized through the ministry of the Ordinariate. And they can also join even though they're baptized Roman Catholics.
Mm. Thanks, Chris. And I was thinking about this recently, and in one sense, I suppose, whether you, as it were, belong to the Ordinariate, it doesn't enable you necessarily to do things you couldn't otherwise do. But on the other hand, the whole, the issue of belonging, I think, is important, isn't it? And I think so. Therefore, from that point of view, I think it, it could be quite significant, really.
Absolutely, and I think it is maintaining a heritage, and the reason I love the Ordinariate and joined the Ordinariate is because I came to faith through the Anglican tradition, and being an Englishman, that's part of who I am and where I am, and maintaining that tradition in the Catholic Church so that others can share that. Pope Benedict called it a treasure to be shared. He said, if you've got it, we want it. We share it with us. And hopefully part of that Anglican tradition that we have treasured is that we're able to share it and bring it to the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chris. So there's one more question. I've noted a question from Gerhard, which is great, and we'll come back to that. But I've one more question on my list, which is, I think it's a very important one, really, is what would you say about the ecumenical relevance of the Ordinariate? In other words, what can we learn from your experience, which, could be more widely applicable, possibly, looking to the future?
Okay. Mm-hmm. I think the biggest thing would probably be getting to know each other. That's the biggest. In recent history, you might remember when John Paul II came to England in 1982. I was in Canterbury that day, and I saw him with Runcie. And for someone who was working even then, hoping for unity, there was a real, I don't know, there was just a kind of whisper in the air that something was about to happen. And as a young man then, and many of my colleagues and friends were absolutely convinced that when John Paul II came, there was about to be an announcement. Something's about to kick off. They're about to make a great declaration of an ecumenical stride, of recognition of sacraments, of recognition of orders, of something was going to happen. And I thought about this because in 1982, there was probably, and that's not that long ago, there's probably a greater understanding of faith and order and ministry of scripture then than there is now. And that could have happened then. It couldn't happen now because Anglicanism around the world, as well as in England, has moved so far apart from what Roman Catholics would believe to be holding to be true. There was a closeness of possibility. That couldn't happen now. We've moved on from that. And I think that the shift has happened even further because ecumenism now has become, I was trying to think of a phrase for it, but it's a kind of is ecumenical collaboration, which that ecumenical dialogue, which was really facing some tough theological questions around scripture, around order, really tough questions, Our Lady, and to be able to understand them. Whereas now ecumenism pretty much means having a food bank together, organizing a global event about the ecology of the world. I don't mean to simplify it, but often ecumenism is around those kind of charitable ecumenical endeavors. And that's not good enough. The Lord didn't ask us in his high priestly prayer to get along together and work a food bank together. May you be one. So we need to kind of face those questions. And I think that what's happened also is that I think joining the Catholic Church, many Catholics tell me what I thought as an Anglican. And they'll say to me things like, of course, as Anglicans, you didn't have Stations of the Cross, did you? Yes, we did. Yes, we did. And of course, you believe, and of course, Anglicans will tell Catholics, of course, you worship Mary, don't you? So I think part of it is to have an environment where those from different traditions can come together and learn from each other about what the other has to say, rather than what we have to say about them. An example, I forget where I read this recently. There was when Archbishop Rowan Williams went to see Pope Benedict, and all the cardinals. I'm not sure it's quite how it happened, but forget the telling of the story. The point is important, not the storytelling. And Pope Benedict went into church, I forget which one, and he went to pray before the Blessed Sacrament. And all the cardinals shuffled off Rowan Williams and said, well, you won't want to do that. Well, you better wait over here. And of course, Rowan Williams, who's, Catholic-minded, he has a great Catholic mind, he knows his stuff. He said, well, why wouldn't I want to do that? So, of course, the trouble is that when you tell someone what they think, that can cause offense, which then puts a great detriment to the work of unity. So I think what the Ordinariate is about primarily is letting other people know what Anglicanism, in the Catholic Church at least, what Anglicanism is, so they can be more understanding to Anglicans who want to come into full communion and work for that unity, and the other way around, Anglicans to Catholics and Catholics to Anglicans, that we can listen to each other and then come to face those tough theological questions. We mustn't duck them. We must never duck those questions. We have to face them as tough as they are, and then allow a space for people to say, yeah, I think we should be one. We should be one, because that's what Jesus wanted for us, to be one, so the world may believe. So I joined the Ordinariate because ultimately I'm evangelist. I want people to believe that Jesus is Lord, and that's why I became a Catholic.
Thanks very much, Chris. Yes, I mean, just before I hand over, I'm going to invite Robin perhaps to chair the remainder of our session, and the timing's working out quite nicely, I think. But before I do that, just to pick up what you said about listening, which I do think is very important, and that seems to me to be something that receptive ecumenism is very much about. It's because whenever I'm talking about it, I always emphasize that it's not about what we have to share with others, although that's important, but it's what my faith can be enriched by the insights of other Christian traditions. So much more about listening than talking. And I suppose what I'd also want to say is thinking about those, I do believe that doctrine is very important. And it seems to me that theological dialogue is essential, but also day-to-day personal dialogue and, practical working together is also important. And in fact, you really need both in the end. But it's I do think there is a danger of ignoring the doctrinal issues because they're difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Robin, perhaps if I can invite you to let me just pin you. Oh, there we are. Yes.
Yes. I've unmuted myself, so I can so that I can talk to people. Okay, shall I take over?
Yes, do, Robin.
Well, thank you very much for people who put questions in the chat. I'll go through one or two of those first. We start with the one which Gwen has put in. It's the last of the questions, and the list is: why is the Ordinariate named after Our Lady of Walsingham?
Well, to give perspective, in the Ordinariate in the United States is the Ordinariate of the Chair of St. Peter, and in Australia is the Ordinariate of Our Lady of the Southern Cross. And in England, we are the Ordinariate of, or England and Wales, I should say, the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, because many Anglicans of a Catholic persuasion have a great devotion to Our Lady of Walsingham. And for us, when it was announced that was going to be our title, we were tickled pink of Our Lady of Walsingham, because we have a great devotion to Our Lady of Walsingham.
Good, thank you very much. I've got a question from Father James Bradley, which I think I'm going to ask him if he wouldn't mind unmuting and expanding on a bit, because he's saying what he's written in chat is, quote, being Christian to each other rather than, sorry, being Christian with each other, being Christian to each other, rather than being Christian with each other. I don't know whether he would like to expand a bit on that. If he could.
Thank you. I wasn't really posing a question. I was just throwing a thought out there. It built on what Father Christopher was saying, this idea of the sort of way in which ecumenism seems to have shifted from being concerned with achieving communion with each other and more about working together on social projects and things like that, all of which is good, of course, but it seems to have shifted from that final goal. So it was just a comment really rather than a question.
And can I say hello, Father James? And just to say that Father James is also a priest of the Ordinariate of Our Lady of Walsingham, although he's working in Washington, University in Washington at the moment. But he is he's one of my confreres, or we are confreres, I should say.
Good. Well, it's very good to have him here. Right now, a question from is it Gerhard? Or I'm not sure I pronounced his name properly. About money. What the question actually says is the parish of the blessed of the precious blood, it should be financially dependent on the Archdiocese of Southwark, or is it independent of it? So what's the financial nexus? Where do you get your money from, I suppose?
Oh, there we are. Death and taxes, they come to us all. We have two hats. The Ordinariate and the diocese are two separate entities, canonically and legally. So we have an Ordinariate trust and we have a diocesan trust, and neither of the twain shall meet financially. So if people belong to the parish, they give to the parish. If people belong to the Ordinariate, they give to the Ordinariate. Now, there is some crossover. So, for example, in my administrations, because I'm parish priest here, if there are some financial costs, I don't know if I'm visiting somebody or going somewhere, there can be a bit of give and take. But essentially, they both stand alone. And we have two separate financial councils, sets of accounts. They stand quite alone. So any administration from the diocese, when the diocese with levies and administration, it all goes through the diocesan finance office. They stand quite separately.
Perhaps I might add, again, Christelle, although it's not a perfect analogy, my previous, before I became a bishop, I was a parish priest in a parish which previously had been run by Franciscans. And in that scenario, there's they also have to distinguish between the money that belongs to the parish and what belongs to the community. And it's not always perfect, but it's sort of, it's not an issue that's unique to the Ordinariate in that sense.
Yeah, did you want to come back on that? I can see you waving. Perhaps you'd like to unmute. And
I'm muted. Yes, I'm. So just to clarify, is the precious blood a diocesan parish or is it Ordinariate parish?
It depends how technical you want to be.
That means the diocese
yes.
Has the responsibility for the building, for repairs, for everything, or is it the Ordinariate who has responsibility for repairs financially, I mean?
Well, you see, both. There's a lot of crossover. So from a legal point of view, it belongs to the trust, the building belongs to the trust, the presbytery, and it's the trust of the diocese. It belongs to them.
Okay, that's fine.
I'm sure if Bishop Paul's a trustee of the diocese, he would say that's not our first concern. Our first concern is the gospel being proclaimed? Are you living the faith? That's the first question. Yes. Who pays for it? Who owns it? That's second.
Okay, fine. So
thank
you. Thank you. That's fine.
Now, Father Michael Lovell had a question which I think it was probably answered, but I just thought I'd give him a chance to, if he wants to supplement it in any way. Perhaps he could about whether a regular Catholic can join the Ordinariate.
Yes, Robin, that question was really answered by Christopher, but I've typed in another question, and it's sitting there saying to everyone with the word file on the top right-hand side. I don't know how to get this question into chat.
Ask it anyway.
I'll just read the question.
We'll do it the old-fashioned way.
Okay, right, the old-fashioned way. This is what I wrote or typed. is there a tension in following instructions relating to both Monsignor Keith Newton and Archbishop John Wilson, the concept of two ordinaries?
Well, that assumes that they're going to contradict at some stage, and they never have yet. But I would say
don't hold your breath, Christopher.
But it is okay. It depends what it is. If, for example, I don't know, a silly example. Let's say the Archbishop was to say you had to have a pot of daffodils in front of Our Lady every day of the week. Now, because he's a diocesan bishop in this church, you follow that instruction. But if Monsignor Newton was to say, well, I want you to be involved in this organization and get involved with this, then you would, because he's your ordinary. And ultimately, the last call of what happens to me would be down to Monsignor Newton, because he's my ordinary and I'm a priest of the Ordinariate. So it's down to him. And if Monsignor Newton was to say...
Chris, you're also parish priest of the Precious Blood. So you're parish priest in the sense that you receive instructions from John Wilson, and John Wilson thinks of all of your people as belonging to his archdiocese.
Yeah, but if they're members of the Ordinariate, they don't. They belong to the Ordinariate. They come under Monsignor Newton. So, for example, if I was to have someone in the Ordinariate who wanted to receive confirmation, I wouldn't go to the diocese. I go to Monsignor Newton, because they're under his authority. So I have to kind of have two filing cabinets on the go all the time.
Well, what about the Catholics then? Not the Ordinariate.
So if someone for confirmation, so we had a confirmation not so long ago, and I had to have papers going to the Ordinariate Chancery and Ordinariate papers going to the Diocesan Chancery, because they come under different jurisdictions.
Okay.
But this is only sacramentality. For sacraments of like marriage applications or confirmation or indeed ordination, then that's different. But the daily running of the show, it never comes up, never comes up. But Michael, do you have something in mind, Michael? Have you got something do you have a case? Are you thinking of a scenario?
Well, one of the issues at the moment is safeguarding. And take safeguarding, for instance, whose program and instructions do you follow?
Oh, in that case, that's been clarified already. Good question. And in some ways, I think safeguarding is changing at a speed, and that's probably going to actually be independent of even dioceses. It's going to be an independent structure in time, perhaps. But in the first case, your residence, because I reside in the Diocese of Southwark, I have done all the safeguarding training for the diocese. Yeah.
Do you have a safeguarding representative for the Ordinariate members and a separate one for the Catholic members?
No, in the parish, no. That makes no difference. Safeguarding is safeguarding. Safeguarding is a unique thing in this situation. We do have a safeguarding officer, a high level, like in the diocese. There's a safeguarding. What are they called? What's the person?
Coordinator, I think.
Coordinator, yeah. We do, but that's a different level. The Ordinariate safeguarding coordinator makes sure that every Ordinariate priest is properly safeguarded in the diocese of residence.
So how does Monsignor Newton relate to that? Does he have an obligation to make sure?
He lives in the Diocese of Westminster, so he does the Westminster.
Okay.
Can we move on to a question from Dan Turner, which is a question I was going to ask if no one else had, about ordination and the priests. I mean, there are two bits of Dan Turner's question. One is, are all or most priests of the Ordinariate converts from the Anglican or similar churches? And the second question, limb of it, is how are priests trained, formed and ordained, please? I mean, my question was going to be more or less the same as that. If I were a member of an Ordinariate congregation, say I was a married man, for example, and I decided that I was called to the priesthood, could I be called to the ordinariate priesthood?
I didn't get the last definition, Robin. What was the last qualification?
If I were a member of an ordinariate congregation,
Yep.
and I wanted to be ordained,
Yep.
I thought I had a vocation, and say I was married. I mean, perhaps it may or may not be relevant. Say I was married. You know,
Yeah.
could I become ordained as an ordinariate priest?
Yeah, no, it is relevant because if you are married, you can't be married and ordained, but you can be ordained and married. So the situation of the ordinariate is that in the early days, at least, all the priests had been former Anglicans. As time has gone on, there are some who were not Anglican, ordained in the Church of England or in the Anglican Communion, but who are now Catholic priests. In fact, Father James is a case in point. He was never an Anglican priest, but he is now a Catholic priest. So, and that's going on. We have at least two I can think of, maybe more, who were Anglicans, joined the Catholic Church as laymen, and are now Catholic priests. So they have gone through the formation program in the Ordinariate or in the Catholic Church to be ordained. There was a dispensation. Now, ordinarily, priesthood is celibate. And that's a discipline, not a rule. Well, there you go. But then the dispensation can be given for some priests. So if someone was ordained in the Church of England, becomes Catholic, goes through the formation program, they then have to have a dispensation. It's not that they will get it, you have to apply for it, and the dispensation for celibacy on that marriage. So if, heaven forbid, a priest's wife should die, he can't get married again. He then vowed to celibacy. So it is taking on the kind of importance of marriage within the becoming a Catholic. If you were, and sometimes happens, a Catholic priest might telephone and don't keep your ears covered, Bishop. They might telephone and say, "I'm a Catholic priest. Can I join the Ordinariate and get married?" And it happens quite often. No.
Yes.
Because once you're vowed to celibacy, that's a vow. You're vowed to celibacy.
Isn't there a similar rule for deacons, I think?
I was going to say, yes, that's...
And also, I think, for Orthodox priests,
yeah.
I think, similarly, if a married man, I think in Orthodoxy it works that if you're married, you can't get married after you've been ordained. I think that's the rule, isn't it, basically? Yeah. So what about formation, though? That's the other part of the question. How would an Anglican layperson who became a Catholic member of the Ordinariate and then wanted to be ordained, how would they be formed?
Yeah, sure. Well, so far at least, every case has been unique so far, but there is a pattern developing. Now, there are guidelines for the Congregation and for the clergy of how formation should take place and what that should be. But somebody said that rules are there not to be kept, but rules are there to be broken. So they find the rules and then discover how they can break them. So for most, if you're an Anglican clergyman at the moment, and if you join the diocese and become a diocesan priest rather than an ordinary priest, most will be taken on case-by-case considerations. And the general rule at the moment is you have to be a Catholic for 2 years before you can start your formation program, and then depending on your experience, age, criteria, it depends, and each one is made to measure. The guys who were ordained for the Ordinariate, who were never Anglicans, they went through the 6-year program. They went to seminary and they did the full 6-year program of philosophy, theology, and then were ordained at that program. Now, the wave that I was in, I'm not sure if Father James was the same in the first wave, we were ordained very quickly. I was received into the church on the 18th of April, ordained deacon the 18th of May the same year, and then priest the 4th of June just after. So some priests go through a 6-year formation program. Our first wave was a 6-week formation program. But, that was a special consideration that Pope Benedict gave, because he said, because you're coming as groups, he said the important thing is that people and pastors stay together. So he wanted very much, if they were journeying together as a group, bringing their heritage, their patrimony, that they should be able to maintain that with that pastor. So although we were ordained very quickly, we still did the full formation program. So once we were ordained Catholic priests, we still went to Allen Hall, we still did our formation, went on retreat, had to write essays. We had to do all the things just the same. We had the program, it was just we were ordained at the beginning of the program, not at the end of it.
Good, thank you very much. I've now got questions are now beginning to come in thick and fast. I think I'd like to take next one from Peter Daly. And again, I think it would be easier if he actually wouldn't mind delivering it in person, as it were, by unmasking. Sorry, not unmasking, what's the word?
Unmuting, yes.
Unmuting, sorry. Can he identify himself?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
I thank you, Father Christopher, for that. My question is about talking about unity and learning from each other. I just wonder about the relationship between those who have crossed the Tiber and those who have left behind. I better out myself. I'm an Anglo-Catholic still, and I have noticed that unfortunately sometimes there's a bit of bad blood still, even 10 years on. Not just with Ordinariate, but even from the first phase of those, from the 1990s when we came on. I've seen things like that Anglo-Catholicism was just play acting, and that I was wasting my time doing that, which is obviously quite hurtful for those of us that are still there. And I'm sure that from the other respect, I mean, I try not to do it, but some Anglicans might view you as traitors, as having had a good life in the Anglican Church and then left. So I just wanted that unity and learn from each other, the relationship between Anglo-Catholics and Roman Catholics who were previously Anglicans. That was the point I was making.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, no, it's a good question and a tough question. And yes, to be absolutely frank, there's two things that happen. From my own experience, when I was in the Church of England and friends became Catholics, it was quite hurtful. It really was. And there was a sense of abandonment. I thought you're my friend, what's going on here? And there was that sense of abandonment, and you want to be cross with people and want to punish them really as well. So I know how you feel, exactly. Now, having made that proverbial jump, exactly that. So former colleagues and friends, and it was St. John Henry Newman who talked about the parting of friends. And I have friends who are very dear friends and very close friends who just will not talk to me. One of my closest friends, it makes me really, I send him Easter greetings, but he will not respond. He will not respond. And I think it's because they feel abandoned, exactly that kind of feeling. So it is a raw thing, and I understand exactly what you mean, Peter. But I hope, as from a Christian point of view, we will be loving and patient with each other. And what I would say to you is what Pope Benedict said to us, and that is, what you have is a treasure to be shared. You have it, we want it. Bring it.
I don't know whether Bishop Paul's got any comment on that issue.
Well, no, I can't really speak from experience, but it's yeah. As Chris says, I mean, that was Newman's experience, and I guess it's difficult. Particularly, I guess let's say for those within the Anglo-Catholic tradition within the Church of England, there must be a certain feeling of being undermined in a certain sense, or feeling, that is our position somewhat less tenable, or may appear less tenable. I don't know. It's difficult for someone outside to really judge something like that.
The word that keeps coming back to me, Paul, in this is abandoned.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense of abandonment, and that's a tough one to deal with. And sorry.
Peter, would you like to come back for a moment, and then we'll move on?
That's interesting but that's very much from the Catholic perspective. I think it's how would you, as now Roman Catholics, make sure that you and your colleagues don't have a rather sneering and condescending view of those who are left behind, because that is something I have picked up, that you say you are the true church, and that's fine. That's not a term that offends me, but if you project that into, therefore you're just pretending, that is perhaps moving it a step further.
I think perhaps from someone like myself, who's a cradle Catholic, so to speak, it's a bit easier because I'm still just as interested in what I can learn from Anglicans, as I'm equally interested in what I can learn from the experience of those who've made that journey. There is something I'd like to, perhaps if I could jump in here, and certain sense usurping Robin's role for a moment, to see what Chris thinks about this. That probably my closest friend, who's a Catholic, has sung for many years in a very good Anglican parish choir within the sort of Anglo-Catholic tradition, and what I sort of picked up from that is his very strong impression that within that Anglo-Catholic congregation, they're very much tuned into the liturgy, in a sense, are very much sort of, perhaps more obviously so than with us. Maybe it's because they're a smaller congregation and it's a bit easier, but I don't know if I've expressed that very well, but I don't know whether that rings any bells with you, Chris.
Yeah,
as I found that very impressive, really. It's
yes.
that sort of sense of involvement and awareness.
Yeah, I think, but also I think that can come because who is it who said Catholics go to mass, Anglicans go to church, and they choose where they go to church. In London, you will find people will travel miles to get to the church of their flavour. And that could be the liturgy, the preaching, the architecture, the social, whatever it might be. And so you tune into that. So if you have a place that has good liturgy and good music, you will often attract people who like good liturgy and good music. So they're going to get, by definition, will get involved. So it will have an excellence because they like that kind of thing. That's not good or bad. It's just how it kind of becomes, you show your wares and people come and take their pick. I think from a Catholic perspective, though, there's something different, is that people, they do get the liturgy, but in a different way. It's an engagement at a different level. Here I've noticed, because we have tried to do worship in an Anglican style, at least, with things like hymns and music. We're trying to build a junior choir. And it struck me as quite ironic the other day. We have these children who don't have English as their first language. It's quite an international singing in an Anglican evensong. I thought this is a bizarre scenario. So it's kind of getting people engaged with the liturgy at the level where they are, and to get them engaged perhaps by singing and so on. It was interesting also how, because the liturgy over Holy Week was quite curtailed, and most notably on Good Friday and indeed the Easter Vigil, and some people, of Precious Blood here at least, said they preferred it. Now, as former Anglicans, as former Anglo-Catholic, we would have done the liturgy to the fine letter. It would have been precise and accurate to the last. We would have followed the rubric as you could possibly get. Whereas most Catholics say, oh, it's nice having no candle, or it's nice having no veneration. Well, it was much quicker, wasn't it? So,
I recognise that. Thank you very much. There's three questions which are of a factual nature, which perhaps we can deal with reasonably quickly as we're getting towards the end now, I think. One from Gwen about, which I think I know the answer to, but who can receive communion at an ordinariate mass? Second, another question, can ordinariate priests become diocesan priests, transfer across as it were? And then finally, are there any ordinariate deacons, permanent deacons, I assume?
To receive communion at a Catholic Mass, you have to be in communion with Peter and in a state of grace. can you, what was the next one about?
Can ordinariate priests, as it were, transfer to become diocesan priests? Does
Yes,
this
absolutely. We are incarnated in the way you're incarnated into a diocese, you're incarnated into the ordinariate. And I'm not sure the technical way, is it transcardination? But yes, it is possible. It is possible to change one to the other. We have had a few. A priest went from the ordinariate to Southwark. We had a guy go from the ordinariate to Arundel and Brighton. And we have had some who've been incarnated into the ordinariate from diocese. So, you know, it's a two-way street, as it were. And I would say the reason is because if it's part of your Anglican patrimony and you wish to maintain that patrimony, then, you know, join the ordinariate. I have to say, as a political side, I'm always puzzled by present Anglican priests who don't even consider joining the ordinariate. They go straight, yeah, we want to be Catholics, that's first and foremost, but that they join the ordinariate without even thinking about the ordinariate. So I'd want to say to them, but you know, this is your heritage, this is your patrimony, this is what's made you a disciple of the Lord. Why don't you want to maintain that and regard them? But anyway, that's another question. And we do have some permanent deacons, yes, in the ordinariate, we do.
Good, thank you very much. Now, is anyone else who hasn't asked a question, ask a quick final question? If so, perhaps they could put their hands up or something, so that we can.
Or simply unmute.
Yeah, or unmute. Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, it's.
Oh, Michael's got his hand up. I see there.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead. Yes. Sorry. Yes. Yes.
Sorry. No, thank you. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And I wonder, when ordinariate priests come to take over a parish, if they could explain, as Father Christopher did, to the parish, to the people, what they are and what they do and what they want. It would have eased a lot of pain from past experience. It's a wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Good, thank you. Can I say, as chair of the Christian Unity Commission, I'll hand over to Bishop Paul to send us on our way, as it were, but I'd like to thank him and Father Christopher for a very interesting evening and for dealing with all the questions so fully and courteously. Bishop Paul.
Thank you very much, Chris. I mean, it's the sort of discussion that we've had, and the things that you've shared. It really sort of illustrates why I find receptive ecumenism so encouraging, really, and enriching. And it's that sort of sharing of experience and learning from other people's story and life, really. I mean, for instance, I must admit, I'd never really thought much about the actual process with that journey that you've been through. I mean, obviously, I knew there had been a journey, but it's but the sort of the things you've had to think about in embarking on that journey with your people, and you know what to do when and how to handle it, has been fascinating, really. So I'm very grateful to you for being with us this evening, and thanks to everyone else for being with us. So perhaps sort of in the spirit of what we often do in ecumenical meetings, and this is mostly Catholics, but perhaps we could finish by saying the grace together, and those of us who are unmuted anyway. So the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, and the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all evermore. Amen.